ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do.
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas. So this episode, Terminate Her, is first and foremost, it's a very obvious reference to the Terminator films, but it is very fitting considering not only is this episode is an homage to the Terminator films themselves, but this episode also brings up a very obvious conflict with the rules of time travel that the series finally brings up, and this episode basically points out a very this is a very big paradox in time travel stories, and it's called the grandfather paradox, and this episode kind of makes reference to the fact that is a big problem in time travel. And I will openly admit that it's not really essential for the watching of today's episode, but Neil deGrasse Tyson has indeed done his own video on it recently that describes the grandfather paradox in more detail than I have time to go into here. But I do recommend watching it because it is an interesting video. But Neil deGrasse Tyson goes into a lot more detail about it over there, so I recommend checking out his channel, Star Talk. And he also explains a couple of other things because that's what he does for a living. In any case, the idea of the grandfather paradox is an interesting one, and I will get into that when it comes up. But in any case, the episode actually opens up with on the Carriager with the Glorft commander handing Glorft a strange armband with a button on it, and of course, Glorft immediately points out that he asked for something that would enable him to actually enslave the humanity once and for all, and points out that his commander just gave him a toy, but of course, the Glorft commander does point out that it doesn't have the same subtlety as some of their other tactics, but he does point out that it will help them enslave the human race nonetheless, and does indeed tell Glorft to actually try it out because he'll be happy with he should be happy with the results, which is something Glorft very much cares about. He doesn't care about all the science and stuff behind it as long as the results wind up in his favor. And of course, Glorft ultimately deciding that he should probably take the commander's word for it for once, decides to put the armband on and press a button, and is then thrown for a loop when it suddenly turns him human. And I'm not gonna picture human Glorft because he literally just looks like a biker, the leader of a biker gang, and while also kind of retaining his features from when he was a Glorft, but of course the other Glorft take one look at their commander and some of them actually kind of vomit a little bit in their mouths if they have one, but of course Glorft immediately looks at his reflection in the mirror and points out that it's very repulsive, and of course, the Glorft commander confirms that he is indeed a bit repulsive because he's human. But and of course, you can't help but feel offended by that. That's what they think. They think humans are repulsive. So of course they're going to say that. But at the same time, as a human myself, I can't help but feel a little bit offended. But of course, Glorft then proceeds to point out that this seems like it would be a bit of an interesting plan, and does tell his fellow Glorfts to actually take a path to Earth so that they can continue their next evil plan, and of course they immediately do that, and of course the Glorft declares that now the Earth will finally be his. Meanwhile, Coop is actually taking Jamie and Kiva to a rock concert, and he's currently trying to find a space. He has because obviously he's in a giant robot. They don't really fit. They don't actually fit parking lots very well, and he eventually winds up just making a space. He can't really find one. He doesn't really fit in one, so he just kind of winds up pushing two cars to the side and just kind of stands in the spaces they were in. So that's ultimately where he winds up parking. But in case Kiva then wonders exactly what it is he's going on, why exactly it is he brought them to a rock concert, pointing out that she doesn't fully understand what training is, and of course she doesn't fully understand how. She points out that Coop had actually promised her training, not necessarily what training is, but does point out what the training is supposed to be in this place. But of course, Coop quickly points out that she's clearly never been to a mosh pit before, and of course Kiva openly admits that she hasn't. But at which point Jamie points out that she'll love it, and point out that it is definitely a very rough place, and that's and then sometimes he's just very happy to just being picked up and surfed on the crowd by a bunch of hot chicks, like he did the last time they were there. And of course, Coop even points out that he's a little bit envious of Jamie and wonders why he never gets picked up and surfed across the crowd like Jamie does. And Jamie just takes one look at Coop's gut, and then remembers the last time Coop tried to go crowd surfing, and because he kind of almost belly flopped onto the crowd, nobody wanted to pick him up, and he wanted him just smacking onto the ground. So Jamie just kind of lets out a sarcastic, "Yeah, I wonder why." When in actuality, there's a very good reason. Coop is too heavy for anybody to lift, and of course the group does kind of mention that a little bit later. But in any case, Coop now having successfully parked Megas, then proceeds to bring the gang into the mosh pit, where they actually do wind up running into Goat and Tiny, and if the references to downtown weren't obvious enough, Goat actually shows up in his outfit that he wore throughout the entirety of downtown. He shows up in that exact outfit, which does indeed confirm that they are indeed the same character. If the similarities weren't obvious enough, the fact that he's voiced by the same voice actor, is designed exactly the same, and also just kind of has a similar habit where he sucks on a lollipop instead of smoking. The fact that he shows up in the same exact outfit he wore in downtown should be a pretty big flag that this is indeed the same character. But in any case, Coop then proceeds to proceeds to run into Goat and Tiny and greet them, and just points out that he's happy they're there. And of course Tiny is very happy to see Coop as well, and they kind of share a bit of a bro hug. But Goat just kind of ogles Kiva's outfit and points out that she's looking very cute today. And of course that's a recurring thing with this character. He just flirts with Kiva a lot. When at one point Kiva wonders what exactly the music is supposed to start, and then immediately covers her ears when the music finally picks up. And of course she immediately hopes that this isn't in fact the music, and asks out loud if it is indeed the music that they were waiting for. And at which point Coop and the rest of the group immediately start moshing, and of course it gets a little bit too rough, and eventually somebody hits Jamie, and he eventually just kind of gets tired of being in the mosh pit, so he decides to go and get some food, and Kiva immediately follows him, with Coop hollering after them that he wants nachos. At which point Kiva and Jamie then proceed to get huge mountains of food, and wonders if and Kiva outright wonders if they have enough, and Jamie points out that they have enough of a serving for Coop. They openly admit that once they drop all of this off, they're going to need to go and get some more food for themselves. Basically, Jamie kind of quickly realizes that this may not be enough food for them and Coop, and points out that they'll probably need to make a second trip. But to this point, where the Glorft, now disguised as humans, actually starts showing up and starts getting a little rough with some of the humans surrounding them, which Kiva and Jamie quickly notice and quickly point out that they should be out of the mosh pit, and that this kind of rough behavior shouldn't be happening in the food stands. And sure enough, we quickly find out why, because as one of the Glorft is actually being rough with the one of the patrons. He accidentally spills soda on himself, which causes his disguise to briefly flicker out. And when Gorath notices this and yells at him to fix it, he immediately remarks that it was a minor bug, and eventually fix his disguise. But that brief moment where he was uncloaked was more than enough time for Kiva and Jamie to quickly realize that the Glorft are there, and quickly realize that they're probably up to something sinister. At which point Gorath out loud, I should mention, in a crowded stadium, I should mention, he outright proclaims that they need to find their target, and of course the Glorft commander immediately picks up his in his human disguise once again. Now picks up his tracker and does eventually point them in the direction of their target, and seemingly points in the general direction of Jamie and Kiva, which which of course causes Jamie to immediately go and hide. While Kiva tries to stand her ground and tries to fight against the Glorft, but as we find out, they're not interested in her like at all. They immediately brush past her and then proceed to focus on a girl behind her called Allie, who I should mention isn't named in the episode, but her name is mentioned in the. Her name is mentioned in the credits for the episode. But in any case, after cornering Allie, Glorft then proceeds to pull out a gun from one of his pockets and proceeds to get ready to shoot Allie, which Kiva quickly realizes is a problem since they're just actively just targeting a civilian. And of course she immediately shoves Allie out of the way. Tells Allie to run because she'll handle the Glorft, and of course Allie has no idea who Kiva actually is, but does ultimately take her word for it. Does decide to do that and decides to actually just run off and go deeper into the into the stadium to get as far away from the rest of the Glorft and from Kiva as they can, because of course Allie has no idea what's going on. She just knows that strange people are trying to kill her and somebody else is trying to not kill her, and she is just having none of it, so she just leaves. At which point Glorft quickly sends his men to actually go and find follow the rest of the group, the girl into the stadium, and while Kiva is just kind of very confused as to what exactly it is they're doing. And of course, she eventually finds Jamie, who as she finds out is cowering behind a trash can and just kind of remarks that he's okay. But of course, Kiva points out that there's something very strange and that the Glorft don't normally target normal civilians, and wonders what exactly it is they're planning. And then points out that they need to find Allie before the Glorft do. And of course, Jamie immediately tries to go his separate ways, pointing out that he'll go look for her while Kiva just kind of splits up and goes look for her in a different direction. But Kiva then points out that that's probably a bad idea, pointing out the very obvious fact that the Glorft are currently cloaked as humans, and that Jamie isn't going to be able to tell the difference. So Kiva and Jamie does ultimately agree that Kiva is right and decides to tag along with her. And they do eventually find Allie in an employees only area, where Allie is currently sneaking through the back hallways of the employees only area to keep as far away from everybody else as possible, and she winds up being pulled into a no entry area where Kiva does kind of tries to convince her that they're on the same side, but Allie is still very confused and has no idea who she is or why she's quote unquote stalking her. But of course, Kiva just points out that they're on the same side, and also Jamie tries to take the immediate opportunity to try and flirt with Allie, and immediately proclaims that he's this superhero kind of dude who just saved the Earth like 12 times. And of course, Kiva then shoots Jamie a look, pointing out which implies that now is just not the time, and then asks what she would have done that would have caused the Glorft to become upset with her. But of course, Allie has no idea who they are, and pointing out that she literally just met everybody and has no idea what's going on. But then Glorft walks into the room, having finally found her, also having split up from the rest of his group because, in his own words, the Glorft commander because the Glorft commander tracker was unable to actually find her. He ultimately decided to go off on his own, and he does eventually find her, and declares that, and then proceeds to point his gun at Allie's head again, and it's at this point where Kiva intervenes, and Glorft finally realizes that she's been interfering because he didn't try to kill her personally the first time. He didn't know that she was there yet. But of course, Glorft pointing out that since that doesn't seem like it's going to be of any consequence, then decides to actually tell Kiva his evil plan, which, as I mentioned, is a very real paradox that exists in time travel stories. And basically his plan is to kill Allie. And of course also proceeds to point out that it seems like that it is indeed a family reunion. And of course Jamie points out that Kiva doesn't actually have any family because she's from the future. At which point Kiva finally figures out what's going on and realizes that Allie is actually her distant ancestor. And of course Glorft does indeed confirm this and does indeed confirm that what his plan is. By killing Allie, he's going to make it so that Kiva has never been born. And of course, Kiva has no idea, is having a bit of a hard time figuring out what exactly that has to do with her. Until Jamie quickly puts two and two together and quickly realizes that if Kiva is never born, then they would have never received. Then he and Coop would have never received Megas and would have never been able to actually fight back against the Glorft. And Glorft does point out that is indeed his plan. By killing Allie, it'll make sure that the Glorft never lost Megas in the first place, which means they will no longer be stuck in the past and will be able to actually take over the future as intended. And of course, I should mention that this is a real-world paradox. I've mentioned this several times, but this is a real-world paradox, and this references a paradox called the grandfather paradox. And basically, all you need to know is that this plan would never work. So basically, the story behind the grandfather paradox is that it's based on the obvious example where if you kill your grandfather, you cease to exist, and it creates a timeline where you can't kill your grandfather. But this is just a paradox in general that just means that if through your own action you create a timeline where you're unable to actually go back in time and affect the timeline, presumably it'll negate the effects of you being able to affect the timeline, and the timeline should just kind of fix itself and continue as normal. And there have been several time travel stories that have referenced this. Terminator, obviously, because that's what the episode is parodying, but also a couple of other things where if you get in the way of something actually being effective. There's been a couple of time travel stories, but Terminator's the main one. I know a couple of these. There's an episode of Family Guy where Stewie uses that to his advantage to stop all of his future selves from disrupting the pilot episode of Family Guy, which is one of the more nonsensical episodes, and I kind of love it. It just becomes a huge mess by the end, and Stewie takes the full advantage of the grandfather paradox to kind of fix the timeline so that he never went back in time to actually affect the pilot episode. It's a very fun idea of a story, but it's fun. It is indeed one of the biggest rules of time travel that you're not supposed to break. If you go back in time and affect the past in such a way where you're no longer able to go back in time and affect that exact moment, and it doesn't really matter how it happens. You can obviously the Gorath's entire plan is to kill Allie outright, but in truth, you can just delay her conception of Kiva's ancestor by like 10 minutes or so, it'll just result in the fact that someone else will be born instead, and then Kiva will never be born, but her ancestry will still continue onward. It'll create a branching path timeline where Kiva's never born, but somebody of equivalent importance probably will be. Basically all you need to know is that Gorath's plan would not work because of this exact phenomenon. If it does indeed happen, it would actually result in a timeline where Glorft never loses Megas, but also results in a timeline where he would never be able to kill Allie in the first place, thus negating his ability to kill Allie at all. So Gorath's plan would never work in a real life time travel scenario, but it's a time travel story, so it makes sense that they would have addressed it at some point. But in case with that little explanation aside, Glorft does indeed wonder if it does indeed wonder out loud if Kiva will just simply cease to exist, or wonders if it'll actually be painful, and prepares to actually go and face off against Glorft, but by grabbing a pipe and actually knocking him out, or rather just disorienting him long enough that they can actually get to him. And of course, Allie takes full advantage of the fact that Glorft is currently distracted to immediately leave. And Kiva quickly points this out and tells Jamie to go after her, but he doesn't even wait for her to give the order. He immediately leaves and immediately goes to find Coop. And Glorft becomes upset, pointing out that obviously his plan obviously he needs to go and find Allie again, and points out that if he does it, that it seems like Kiva's friends have abandoned her, and of course this results in the two of them actually fighting very briefly. Where Kiva actually winds up using the pipe that she grabbed to actually fight back against Glorft, and eventually they do wind up getting knocked into the main commons area, where where of course Glorft immediately Kiva does point out that if this is what his plans have devolved into, killing innocent people, killing an innocent girl that did nothing wrong to him, that he seems to have a bit of a fallen from grace as a Glorft commander. But Glorft immediately responds that is indeed exactly what he's planning to do, and proceeds to grab Kiva's hand as she's trying to hit him with her pipe again, and then proceeds to knock her against the wall, knocking her unconscious, and then he proceeds to go and regroup with his fellow Glorft to actually go and find Allie again. And of course, Allie has since ran into the main stadium, where she's actually only tripped by Jamie, who has actually started cowering underneath one of the benches. And what we quickly find out, and of course, what we quickly find out is that he did indeed go find Coop and try to figure out a way to actually inform him. But of course, Allie points out the very obvious contradiction, and that it seems like he's hiding. And of course, Jamie denies the fact that he was hiding at all. But Allie points out that isn't really a bad idea, and he does indeed kind of recorrect his statement, pointing out that yeah, he was kind of hiding maybe a little bit, but again, and of course, the two of them kind of share a bit of a moment, which is very awkward, I should mention, because obviously Jamie is Kiva's teammate, and he's now making googly eyes at her. He's making googly eyes at her ancestor, which is problematic for a number of reasons, but also does confirm the fact that Jamie doesn't indeed find Kiva attractive because he's attracted to her ancestor, and they look very similar as a result of that. So. Yeah, there's an implication there. There's an implication there. Don't read into that too much, but there is an implication there. But in any case, as they're actually kind of sharing their moment, somebody actually, one of the guys from the stadium actually winds up snapping a picture of them to put on the jumbotron, which of course Coop quickly notices. But of course, both Tiny and Goat point out that it couldn't be Jamie because he's currently with a girl, and Coop just kind of goes back to moshing. But this does wind up giving the Glorft a key on her location and figuring out where exactly it is she's supposed to go. And of course, they do eventually chase her up into the stadium, where she runs face to face with Glorft, who pulls out his gun and points out that this is the end of the line for her, and that he can't wait to actually defeat her and take the future for himself. But then Kiva actually shows up with a cup of soda and proceeds to actually short circuit both Glorft's gun as well as his transformation device, and this causes him to actually turn back into a Glorft, which does cause the Allie to panic because she has no idea what exactly it is she's looking at. But this also does indeed serve double duty as Glorft does wind up on the jumbotron because he just kind of de-transformed back in the middle of a crowded stadium. And Coop quickly notices that Glorft is there because he's currently in the mosh pit and is able to actually see the jumbotron. And of course, when Goat and Tiny point out who he is and why he's there, Coop does point out that he doesn't know the answer to either of those things, but he's going to find out and points out that he's not going to let Glorft ruin his concert, and proceeds to try and make his way back to Megas, but it quickly becomes apparent that he's gonna have a bit of a hard time because A, he's currently in a mosh pit, and B, his parking space is very far away from where the stadium is. So he does kind of push his way through and tries to figure out how to get back to Megas. Meanwhile, Allie's kind of freaking out about the fact that she's being face to face with a giant squid monster, but takes full advantage of the fact that he can't shoot his gun to run off and go hide. Well, of course, Glorft proceeds to point out that the commander's plan seems to have failed miserably once again, and of course this results in a brief confrontation where Kiva tries to actually fight back against the Glorft and also tries to make a beeline to Allie as well. And of course, Coop is still trying to make his way through the mosh pit, where he's trying to figure out how to get back to Megas. But then with Goat and Tiny's help, they actually pick up Coop and have him crowd surf out of the stadium, which does wind up working. But of course, Goat and Tiny do remark that he is a little bit too heavy and needs to lay off the nachos. But of course they do kind of push him out of the stadium, and Jamie, while he and Kiva are trying to look for Allie and try to help her, Jamie does notice on the jumbotron that Coop has finally gotten what he always wanted and is finally being able to actually finally crowd surf, and does tell Coop to rock on, also tells him to hurry up and get back to Megas, and before going to find Allie. And eventually, Allie winds up at the very top of the stadium, where Kiva with Jamie and Toe eventually show up, and of course, Kiva once again offers to help Allie, but when Allie asks her why she should trust her, of course, Jamie then shows up and tells her that she's currently the only one who isn't a snot green alien, and Allie does point out that that's good enough reason for her. But in any case, Glorft then proceeds to show up, having somewhat fixed his cloaking device with a weapon, and proceeds to actually corner Allie, and points out that now he's getting sick and tired of having to chase her down, and points out that now there's nowhere left for her to run, and declares that now he's going to finally finish her off. And of course, as he's about to, Kiva actually winds up making sure that he can't by actually kicking his gun down against the ground, which actually causes a blast to go off and break the ground at Allie's feet, and she winds up falling off the stadium and directly into Megas, which with Coop just pointing out to her that they're just lucky he's had the roof open, and with that Glorft, believing that she fell to her death, then declares that now he's going to finally be able to kill Kiva and Jamie without any real interference, until Megas shows up and starts blocking all of his shots, so that while Kiva and Jamie get back into Megas, and Glorft quickly becomes very obviously annoyed, pointing out that Coop is always getting in his way, and then proceeds to tell the Glorft commander that his plan has failed miserably, and now they're going to do things his way. And of course, he then proceeds to summon all of his Glorft mechs. And once Jamie and Kiva are back in the back seat, Coop then asks him if they ever got his nachos, but of course, Kiva points out that they've got a lot more to worry about, pointing out that they need to keep Allie safe because they could compromise the timeline, and then proceeds to actually explain the situation to Coop, who doesn't get it but understands that keeping her safe is a very big deal. But and of course, it's at this point where the Glorft then proceeds to actually there's a fly where the Glorft then proceeds to actually summon all of their mechs and get ready to actually take down Coop and get ready to fight him. And it's at this point where Coop finally delivers his signature trash talk, where he goes into a point about how they tried to ruin his concert, and also points out the more obvious fact that they tried to kill a girl that did nothing to them, and also tries and fails to grasp the idea of what the grandfather paradox actually is. But it does ultimately points out that he doesn't need it as a reason to kick Glorft's butt, and immediately goes in to actually fight back against them. And initially, he does wind up doing a pretty handy job, wrecking all of the. He winds up wrecking several of the attendants' vehicles in the process, because obviously they're fighting in the middle of a crowded parking lot. Of course, they're going to just mess up a lot of cars and stuff. But of course, Coop does eventually destroy all of the robots, and also, interestingly, because somehow this winds up on the Jumbotron, and all the people in the stadium kind of wind up celebrating the fact that Coop is actually fighting back against the Glorft, and are kind of cheering him on from the stadium, which I think is kind of funny. But in any case, Coop is eventually able to fight back against all the robots, and while the stadium people do kind of cheer on Coop's beatdown of the Glorft, and eventually gets to the point where it's a one-on-one fight with Coop and Glorft, and Glorft does point out that he's tired of Coop always getting his way, but now he's going to finish him off personally, and the two proceed to get into a confrontation where they start fighting each other, and immediately start attacking each other, and Glorft actually winds up picking up a nearby train as a whip and start trying to use that to hit Coop, who not only deflects it but also retaliates with a series of 3 missiles, 2 of which wind up hitting Glorft in the kneecaps and cause him to collapse. The third one winds up missing entirely, but it winds up hitting a Pop TV sign, which is just there in the stadium. So because obviously they don't like Pop, because obviously I've mentioned this, they don't like Pop TV. We're not supposed to root for Pop TV because MTV ruined their show back in the day and it took it away from them. So of course the creators are still bitter about that. It's still a funny recurring joke, and it's a very obvious, very targeted joke, but it never stops being funny that they just are just that petty. But But in case Glorft, with his kneecaps with the kneecaps of his robot now broken, summons every single last one of the mechs that he has to actually fight back against Coop. And of course they all start dogpiling on Megas, and Ellie then sarcastically remarks if this is Coop's idea of protection, and Coop merely points out that if they want to mosh, he's going to mosh back, and then proceeds to kind of both smash away all the robots, but then goes in for a belly flop with Megas while rocking out to the music that's currently playing in the stadium, which is kind of one of the funniest things ever. And of course, Coop does wind up defeating the robot, the Glorft, this way, and of course, the people in the stadium just kind of celebrate the fact that Coop chased off the Glorft. And it's at this point where Glorft does tell the Glorft commander that he said that he's going to pay dearly for his failure when they get back. And then tells Coop that he's tired, that he doesn't know how he's able to continue interfering with all of his plans. But he will eventually come back, and he will eventually defeat Coop once and for all. And Coop points out that he says that every time, and then just tells him to get the hell out of his town. And of course, Glorft, because his robot doesn't have legs anymore, the Glorft commander has to kind of scoop him up with his own robot, and then carries Glorft out. And of course, with the Glorft now dealt with, Allie and Kiva have a bit of a heart-to-heart, where Allie admits that she never actually saw her families much, because of course she's always been busy fighting to protect humanity, and does point out that she would very much like to get to know Allie better, but Allie just kind of points out that for very obvious reasons she's not going to be doing that, because she just kind of finds Kiva and her friends insane, and points out that she's going to move back to Brooklyn where she thinks it's safe. And proceeds to leave, but not before flashing a smile at Kiva, and the two kind of share a tender goodbye before Allie leaves. And then we find out that the stadium was completely destroyed in Coop's fight against the Glorft, and the staff are currently cleaning up all of the mess he made. But in case following the entire storyline, Coop, everybody, including Tiny, is actually back in Coop's house and are actually watching Coop play video games, and it's at this point where Jamie then proceeds to kind of add to Kiva's misery by pointing out that if he had actually hooked up with Allie, that would make her his great grandfather, which of course both Kiva and Tiny do point out was a little bit disturbing, and of course Kiva points out that Jamie should never say something like that again, pointing out that it would be a very disturbing thing for him to say. Meanwhile, Coop concludes that he has finally wrapped his head around the grandfather paradox, and tries to explain it to Kiva, but once again whiffs, and it doesn't fully understand the story behind what is going on. It doesn't fully understand Glorft's plan, but Kiva ultimately tells him not to worry about it, pointing out that they've dealt with Glorft and his plan, and that so long as he's been dealt with, that they don't really have to worry about it. And of course, Coop then points out that if they ever did get his nachos. Meanwhile, and this is the end gag. Glorft, as a way to punish the Glorft commander for his failure, has the Glorft commander disguise himself as Coop, so he can get all of his anger and aggression out by beating the shit out of a duplicate of Coop. And yeah, of course. So yeah, obviously that is he does kind of point out that the Glorft commander would pay dearly for that, but basically he just beats the clone Coop within an inch of his life, which means that he's being the Glorft commander within an inch of his life, and the Glorft commander can only really do that until Glorft eventually gets all of his anger out with him. And yeah, so obviously this episode's main plot revolves around the grandfather paradox, but which is interesting. But yeah, basically all you need to know about this episode. And again, I recommend watching Neil deGrasse Tyson's video on it, because it's very informative about what the grandfather paradox is, and about how it's the main rule of time travel that you should not break. But yeah, this episode very much references the Terminator movies, but also the grandfather paradox. It is a very interesting thing in a time travel story, and every time travel story brings it up at least once. But it is an interesting concept in that if you mess with the timeline enough, you could eventually create a timeline where you don't exist, or rather otherwise you're unable to interfere with the timeline, thereby creating a timeline that should function mostly as normal. So yeah, it is a very interesting thing, and I do recommend watching Neil deGrasse Tyson's video on it. But yeah, in any case, I did like this episode because it does eventually bring up that very obvious problem with the time travel story. And I do kind of like that. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of good perks down there by way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked on the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. What's about me was a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!